So what if you did believe? Like, what if that was in your moments, in your minutes, every single day of every single week, that just radiated out of you? The world would be a radically different place. As we've been looking this month at going and serving and going around the world, and last week eating food from all over the countries we visit, and putting your name on the board that's saying, I will go. The one thing I get blessed with is when I take people around the world, when we come back to the States, they always say to me, I can't wait to go and serve again. When do you think we'll be able to do that again? And I kind of just turn and I look and I say, now. Like right here in your city, you have the same opportunities. Unfortunately, oftentimes, for 2 weeks a year, we go and we serve, or 1 week a year, we go and serve, or 1 weekend a year, or every 3 years. In reality, we're called to go and love our city, our community, our neighborhoods, the person across the street, even the HOA. I struggle to see that as truth. But right here, we are asked to love our city. If you look in Scripture, when they talk about, in our world, community development, going into a community and working with them over a long period of time, oftentimes they reference Jeremiah chapter 29. In Jeremiah 29, they talk about how the Israelite people, they're living in exile. And they're in Babylon, which is modern-day Iran and Iraq. And as they're living in Babylon with their enemies, the prophet Jeremiah comes to them and says, God has a message for you. And he says for you to build homes, to settle in, to plant gardens, and then to eat food from the garden. And I'm wondering if I was them as I was sitting there waiting for the prophet Jeremiah to give me a word from the Lord, I would want him to say, hey, pretty soon you're going to go back to your home. You're going to go back to the land where you came from. And when you get back to that land where you came from, you can build some homes again, and you can plant some gardens again, and you can grow some food, and you can eat it. And yet, he says, build homes right where you're at. Settle in, plant gardens. And I don't know if you know this, when you put a seed in the ground, it takes a long time till you can actually eat that food. So I would be sitting there going, no, I don't want to build a home. I don't want to settle in. I don't want to be a part of this. I want to go home. I'm tired of living in exile with these people. I can't stand them. They brought us out of our home. And yet God then says, to go a little bit farther, he says, seek the peace of your city. And not only seek the peace of your city, pray that they may prosper, because if they prosper, you prosper. So wait a minute, now not only do you want me to settle in and build homes and be here, you want me to pray for these people that removed my ancestors from our homeland and brought us into this place. You want us to pray that they have peace and that they prosper? Oftentimes when you read Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, you think God is saying one thing to you, then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, I think he means this. When Jesus in Luke was talking to the expert in the law, it says the expert in the law came to him and asked Jesus this question. He just simply says, what do I need to do to have eternal life? And Jesus, as he does, he turns the question right back to him. He says, well, what does the law say? You're an expert in the law. What does it say? Well, the expert in the law knows that's an easy answer. Leviticus 19, Deuteronomy 6, the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your body, soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says you've answered correctly. The man then looks at Jesus again and tries to test him, it says. And he says, well, who is my neighbor then? And Jesus, as he does, I love how he never really teaches. He just tells stories. And he tells a story that would have made sense to this man. He said there was a man that was walking down the road to Jericho, which people knew was a long road, but was also a dangerous road. And as the man was walking down to Jericho, robbers came and they beat him and they stole his money and they left him on the side of the road bloody at the point of death. And he said as he was laying there, a priest came and walked upon him and saw him laying on the side of the ground instead of stopping, went to the side of the road and looked at him and walked past. He said that after the priest left, a Levite came. And keep in mind, the man is picturing, understanding, the priest, that's the good guy. Okay, no, the Levite comes. Okay, that's another good guy. But the Levite comes and he looks at the man laying there. And he too comes to the side of the road and just looks and walks past. I think it's important to put Scripture in our perspective, in our world sometimes, so that we can fully understand what it's like. Picture a man walking down Queen Creek, and he's laying there, and he gets mugged, and he's laying there, and he's a bloody mess. And the priest from the Catholic Church on Cooper Road comes walking by, and he's coming to get a drink here at Circle K. And he sees the man laying there on the side of the road, and the priest stops. And the people in his church are driving by, and they're watching him, and he looks at him, and he looks around, and he just keeps walking. And then Matt Shiley from the Grove, because he's our nicest pastor, he comes upon, and he's coming, and he sees them, and he's like, I'm late for a counseling appointment. I really can't help you. I'm sorry. I've got to go help my people. And he walks by. I mean, it's that comical, honestly, of why wouldn't these people stop to help this man? And then Jesus says a Samaritan stopped. He said he knelt down before him, and he bandaged him, and he picked him up, and he put him on his donkey, and he brought him to an inn. And he told the innkeeper, leave him here till he's healthy. Give him food. Here's money, and if I'm short, I'll come back, and I'll feed him, and I'll pay for this, and I'll take care of it. The expert in the law probably started to take a little bit of a step back. If you're in your mind right now to honestly picture when I say who is your enemy, who is the person that you can't stand? We all unfortunately have prejudices and things that we hold against people or voting groups or nationalities or colors. And it's deep within our soul. And so if you're picturing that person that is your enemy, multiply that. The expert in the law hears Jesus say that the Samaritan, the expert in the law, steps back, and it's almost as if he can't comprehend, why would you have the Samaritan help this person? Jesus then asks him this question. He looks at him, and he says, who is the neighbor in this story? And the expert in the law, he doesn't say the Samaritan, because he can't even get those words out of his mouth. He said, the one who showed mercy. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. I looked up the word mercy in the dictionary. Sometimes I need a little bit of help. And it says kind or forgiving treatment of someone who could be treated harshly. It then says a blessing that is an act of divine favor or compassion. A blessing that is an act of divine favor. Same. You look in scriptures, and Jesus was constantly these blessings, these moments of divine favor, where Jesus is interacting. But if you really honestly take a hard look at it, Jesus was always flipping the script. He was doing the complete opposite of what the religious elite thought that he should do. He was sitting and having dinner with tax collectors. He was sitting and hanging out with sinners and the enemies and the less thans. And why is he even with those people? And as the religious elite and even the religious mediocre watched Jesus, they saw him model something that they've never seen or experienced before. You see, Jesus truly understood what it meant to love your city, or love your community, or love your neighbor. He did that in the way he acted and the way he spoke and with the people that he sat with. If I was to say, hey, later today we're going to have an event and we're going to go love our city, you kind of instantly sit up and you think, oh, that sounds like fun. I'd like to go with you. I'll bring my friends. It'll be a great day of community service. Can I get hours for those? Will that count? You know, when you think about it at the end of the day, well, that was just a phenomenal experience. I really feel good about myself. And what happens too often in our world of faith is we begin to gather and serve and walk and be with people that look just like us and talk just like us and think exactly like we do. And yet that's not what Jesus did. Those aren't the places that he went. Like if you're really honest and looking at how he lived. At the very end of Jesus' life, he's sitting in the upper room with his disciples. It's their last meal together. And Jesus walks into the room and they're all sitting there. And I imagine they kind of know that something is about to happen. And Jesus then gets some water and a rag and he begins to wash each one of their feet. And as you picture him going from disciple to disciple, this look of confusion as they were sitting there. And Peter's getting angry. And he tells Jesus, "You're not touching my feet." It's a sign that he probably had really bad fungus or something. And Jesus looks at him and he says, "Look, if I don't wash your feet, you can't enter into my kingdom." And Peter says, "Well, then wash my whole body." And then after he washes their feet, I wonder what it must have felt like as they sat there and look around. And it's like, I can't imagine that was a regular occurrence. And as they look at Jesus and they wonder what's going on, and Jesus looks at them one at a time and he says, "One of you will betray me." Necks must have just been snapping back and forth and subtly pointing at each other. I think it's him. And then Peter says to him, that's not possible. You don't know what you're talking about." And Jesus slowly turns and he looks at Peter and he says, "Peter, you will deny me 3 times before this night is over." Imagine the stillness in that moment, how Peter must have felt. So then Jesus, I think he stood before them and he gives them this last teaching or these last words. And in John chapter 13, it wasn't John chapter 13 for him, it was just his words. He said, "A new command I give you," as he's looking at them, "love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." 3 times he says that. Love one another. Love one another. Love one another. It's like he had a theme or something. But the interesting thing is the first thing that came out of his mouth would have caused confusion, because "a new command I give you, love one another." Well, we know from Scripture, love one another is like the oldest commandment. Like they would have looked at each other and again thought, new commandment? Like this is ancient. Like this is the most holy of holies. Every Hebrew person from start to finish knew the commandment to love one another, love your neighbor as yourself. And then it's as if it stops and it pauses and Jesus lets it set in. You see, because what that meant was when he said a new command, the understanding of that was for them to love with a new perspective. As they were leaving and going about their life, they were to understand and look at life differently and see people differently and understand that their enemy may be the person that they're actually supposed to sit with. Look at your world differently as you move from this moment. One of my favorite movies is Dead Poets Society. You have to be old to understand what that movie is. And Robin Williams plays Mr. Keating, and he's this teacher, this English teacher at this all-male boarding school full of wealthy and up-to-duty people. And the boys are all stuck in their programs, and the teachers are all stuck in their systems. And Mr. Keating comes in and starts radically changing them. And on one day at his English class, he tells the students, he clears everything off his desk, and he says, "I want you to come stand on my desk," and nobody will do it. And all of a sudden, one kid comes up and he stands on the desk, and he just kind of looks around. And Mr. Keating says to him, "I want you to look at your world differently, with a new perspective, from a new angle, with a new understanding. Don't get stuck looking at the world as if it's always the same. Have a new perspective." When I was 10 years old, I remember my dad was a pastor. Come here real quick. You should never sit in the front row. Come on up. Have you been up here before?
I've not.
It's kind of fun, huh?
Yeah.
So as you're standing up here looking around, I want you to know that every single person in this room is looking at you right now. So oftentimes we come to church and we sit somewhere and we watch the person standing up here. And I remember when I was 10 years old, my dad was a pastor. And we're at this church. We should probably face that way because there was pews in our church. And I asked my dad, I said, Dad, can I come sit on stage with you? Back in the day, the pastor would sit up on a row against the back wall, then the worship pastor, then all the other important people, they'd sit there, and one at a time, they'd come up to the podium. And the podium was this gigantic thing. And I remember sitting there with my dad, and I'm just kind of looking around, and I realized that everyone was staring at me the whole time, and I'm looking at my friends in the back row, and I'm making faces at them, and it's just like, this is great. But from that moment on, my perspective on church changed because I'd been looking at it from that direction, and I realized there's such a different view when you see the faces. You know what my dad spoke on that day?
What did he say?
I don't know. Like I literally have no idea what my dad spoke on. Like not one clue. But I will always remember sitting on that stage with him, seeing the church. You can go sit down. Thank you, Garrett. For the rest of my life, I've taken that moment with me and realized that the church is so much different than I thought it was supposed to be. You see, I was so used to sitting in a row and just listening to the process and singing the songs and going through the motions, but for some reason sitting there, not remembering anything, but the experience of being a part of it changed me. You see, when you love with a new perspective, every moment, every person, every experience is different. In Matthew 6, verse 22, Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body. And what he means by that, in our world, we understand that light comes in through the eyes, and the things that we look at and the things that we experience change our mind and they change our heart. But in ancient times, in Jesus' time, they believed that light came from the heart and left through the eyes. So they believed that where they went, they were bringing light or darkness with them. And so what he's saying when he says love with a new perspective, he's also saying understand where you go, how you live, it's changing. But don't go in with your agenda. Go in with the understanding of the person that is actually there. When we started Live Love, one of the things that we did is we started this service days. And those are great, but I told my wife, I said, let's do a huge Live Love day. And I've shared this before, but we had like 1,000 people show up one year for our Live Love day. The next year we had like 1,200 people. Then we had like 1,500 people. And at the end of every day, I felt ecstatic because I thought it was amazing to bring all these people together. And my wife would sleep for a month because she was the one that actually did all the work. And our leaders would be exhausted. And one year I was sitting with one of our leaders from downtown who lived in the community. And she said, Paul, most of these people, 90% of these people come down here once a year. And they take their pictures with me. And I don't see them again for another year. And I just kind of sat there, and she says, we're not the zoo, Paul. And I realized I had missed the mark. I had loved with an agenda that I wanted to have. And so we stopped doing those Live Love days, and we got a lot of flack for that. And we started doing these service days, and we started diving deeper into the community of looking at, okay, how can we love with a new perspective? Well, the first thing you have to understand when you read what Jesus said in that first line, he says, a new command I give you to love one another. And then he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. See, these 12 disciples have been following Jesus. They've been listening to Jesus. They've been seeing him sitting with little kids and with the people that he wasn't supposed to sit with. They saw him eating with people. They saw him following and leading and guiding and going throughout his days. They used to have a saying that you follow in the dust of the rabbi, meaning you follow so close to their teaching that it just rubs off on you. And Jesus said, as I have loved you, so you must now love one another. And what that means is the understanding that love has a story. He said, I have loved you, but love has a story. Every single person that you interact with has a story, has a background, has something that has brought them to this moment, this experience. And if you love them the way you want to be loved, you're missing out on how they need to be loved. And if you're not sitting with them and hearing their story and spending time with them, then you're missing it. Love has a story. For some reason, for years, for most of my life, in fact, it was really difficult for me to say the words, I love you. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I was in a boarding school or grew up overseas or what, but that was difficult. My parents used to say, Paul, I love you, and I used to say, thank you. And I remember when I left for college, my mom stood at the door and she said, Paul, I love you. And it took everything in me, and I said, I love you too. And as a parent and a grandfather now, I say I love you 500 times a day to this kid and my kids. I want them to know that. Nathan Hughes, who works here as our pastor of young adults, knows that I have struggled with this. And so when he'll come in my room or my office and we'll talk, or if we're in the coffee shop or on the phone, almost every time when he hangs up the phone or he leaves, he said, hey, Paul, I love you. And I'll say, that's great, dude, go. He's like, Paul, you have to say it. You have to say it. I'm like, fine, I love you. There you go. And he'll walk away. We all have a story. We all have this thing that brings us to this moment. We all have these insecurities. One of my greatest insecurities, honestly, was speaking in public. Because I stutter over my words, my vocabulary isn't the neatest and greatest and most wonderfulest. And I tried, and I looked how other speakers did, and so they would do their notes, and then some people would memorize them, and I couldn't do any of that. And then one day I just realized I have to be true to who I am. This is what I'm preaching off of right now. Like, these are my notes. This next slide is the order that I'm going in. Like, for real, that's the slide thing that she has to follow. And I was embarrassed about that. You can get rid of that. For a long time, because that's gibberish. That makes no sense. And yet in my mind, when I look at that, it's the time of creating that. The teaching actually settles into me. And I do care about you, but the teaching changes me. The process changes me. You see, love has a story. And when you begin to step into the story in the lives of other people, man, it radically alters who you are. Father Gregory Boyle runs a ministry called Homeboy and Homegirl Industries in LA, and they work with gang members and drug addicts. And he has a book called The Whole Language, The Power of Extravagant Tenderness. And he said when they have gang members or drug addicts come into their ministry, he goes, we don't ever correct. We just love. Continually are just loving on them. And they say they have an 18-month program. Because they say with a child, when a child is born, it takes about 18 months for them to fully understand who their parents are and the relationship with them and the love that is given. And he said it's the same thing with a gang member. When they come in, it takes them about 18 months to accept that love. In his book, he said, it is often true that the pain a gang member has caused hasn't been able to keep pace with the pain he feels, with the pain that he or she feels. And so they're masking that by causing more pain. Love has a story. Last Sunday night, I was exhausted. I was sitting on the couch, and a special came on TV with Adele singing in LA at the Griffith Observatory. I know I don't look like an Adele fan, but she's unbelievable. And she starts singing this song called Remedy. And it was this beautiful moment, and I'm sitting there watching, and I was so exhausted, that's what I'm going to say. I just literally started weeping. And I'm hiding my face from my wife so she can't see me. But the words were so powerful. She says, so desperate to find a way out of my world and finally breathe. Right before my eyes, I saw that my heart, it came to life. This ain't easy. It's not meant to be. Every story has its scars. All of us have emotional scars, physical scars, spiritual scars, and yet somehow we come together to learn about the beauty of how Jesus lived and the hope of taking it out to our 10,080, 800 hours, whatever it is, into our week and change the lives of others. Jesus says, love one another, but in reality, what he's saying is love with a new perspective, and that love has a story. He then goes on in that passage in John, a new command I give you, love one another. And as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. I sat there looking at that line and thinking about that song that Adele sang, and I realized that love is the remedy. Love is the remedy for everything that we do, for every person that we come across, for how we treat people, for how we talk to people, for how we're called to live and grow and tell the story of Jesus. And yet we get stuck in our differences or our thought patterns or our stereotypes or prejudices or how we view the person that we just don't want to be with. The person that's in our life that is so difficult. Love is the remedy for all of that. When you think of how do you love your city, how do you love your neighborhood, all of it has to begin with this statement. After this service, we're going to gather and hand out Thanksgiving boxes. And maybe the first step for you was simply to go and buy a Thanksgiving box and bring it back. In that moment of love that you're sharing this with someone, knowing that you're blessing someone's life. Trust me, I've been in that place where I've received those boxes, and it's a humbling experience to take that from someone. But what if the next step then is to actually deliver the boxes? And that moment when you knock on the door and they answer, and how you greet them and you ask them their name and you introduce yourself and you've got your kids with you. That moment is holy and spiritual, where our stories collide. You see, what we started doing with Live Love after we stopped our big, huge days is we started these monthly days, and we bought a house downtown and we renovated it and called it the Live Love House, and we gather and we go and serve in our communities. And mowing a lawn or something like that is great. That still happens once a month, but we're trying to be very intentional on who you're working with and going back to the same place over and over and over again. And the city called us a while back, probably 10, 12 years ago, about this lady named Maria Scott, and she was a hoarder, and her house was disgusting, and the yard was disgusting. And they called us, and we came to her house, and we mowed her lawn, and she told us to go away. So we came back the next month and we mowed it again and weeded the stuff. And she said, get out of my yard. And we came back the next month, and this is Mike. And he went back every single month. He's from the Grove here. And he realized her love language is anger. And so he started going back and forth with her and joking back and forth. And they were constantly going at it. And she would call him. He told me once, he said, she called me at midnight because I didn't mow the alleyway. And she said, you didn't mow the alleyway. And he's like, it's midnight. She goes, you didn't mow the alley. He said, I'm coming back tomorrow. Okay, bye. And for years, they had this relationship. And I remember she looked at me once. She said, I'm never coming to your church. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I wish I didn't have to go all the time too, but I'm here. I didn't really say that. And then one Sunday she showed up and she sat right over there and just angry the whole time. And then she kind of looked at me and once went, just a small little smile and walked out. 2 months ago, she passed away. And I remember it was just hard because I started then asking more about her story. You know, oftentimes we find people's stories, we find more about it after they pass. And I realized that she had no friends, she had no family. And so we planned a memorial service for her at the Live Love house, and 5 people from Live Love came, her neighbor's daughter, her former employee, or former boss, and his wife. And we went around and told stories about how mean she was. But then how loving she was and compassionate. And then Mike at the very end, he was sitting there quietly and he says, I don't know who this lady you guys are talking about, but the Maria I know was mean and her feet smelled And she was angry all the time. But she was my friend. And I miss her. Those two lives never would have crossed if he wouldn't have mowed her lawn and came back and came back and came back. You see, love is the remedy. And when you make your life a blessing of divine favor, man, it changes. Those moments, they change people's lives. See, we have to love from a new perspective. We have to understand that love has a story, and we have to understand that love is the remedy. After the Live Love Day, when I sat down with Ruth from the community and I said, "What do you want?" And she said to me, "Paul, we want a place where our kids are safe." And we started dreaming about that with the people in the community. And Christian Kelly, who was sitting over there in last service, is the teacher of architecture something. I don't know what it is. And he, for a semester, his class studied our land, and we brought the community down, older people, ex-gang members, junior hires, people that didn't speak English, some that were from different places, and they sat with the class, and for an entire semester, they dreamed about what this land would become. And then 2-3 years ago, we took an offering on Christmas, and you guys gave money to buy this land. And Jack DeBartolo, who designed this building, he began to design this dream called the Oasis. And this is what it looks like. And it's a place where there's soccer fields and gardens. And in 2 or 3 months, we're breaking ground and we're starting building this. And it all comes because we sat with the people in the community and they said, we want a place that's safe for our kids. We want a place where we can grow things. We want a place where we can have quinceañeras and weddings. We want a place where we can eat together and grow food together and learn how to work in the kitchen and learn how to build things with our hands. And all of that was them saying, this is what we dream about. You see, when love has a story and you understand that love is the remedy, you walk through life with people and you step into things and places that you never thought that you would actually be in. And you find yourself in these moments where the only explanation is that God is here and God is going to continue to guide and continue to lead and continue to change the stories. And as you're stepping deeper into these relationships, you're having to continually turn to Jesus and say, Jesus, I need you in these moments. I need you with me. You see, when you understand that love has a story, the person that you're with, instead of placing yourself above them, you place yourself below them. And I don't know if Adele is a Christian or not, but I find that sometimes in songs like this, it moves your soul. And as I was listening to this song 56 times this last week, I found that there were some words, some lines that were speaking to my soul. It was as if Jesus was speaking to me. And it was also, he was saying, I need you to do this for others. You see, in the song, she sings, no river is too wide or too deep for me to swim to you. Come whatever, I'll be the shelter that won't let the rain come through. Your love, it is my truth. And I will always love you. And I promise you will see that I will be your remedy. Man, that's powerful. I challenge you to take your story, give it to Jesus, start walking with him and letting him guide you, and understand that every person and place you come in contact with, you are his disciples and you are telling his story. I called Adele, I asked her to come, she said she couldn't. So then I realized Dre is the closest I can get to Adele. So sit and listen to this song and realize that God is asking you and calling you into such a deeper level of love.